Coming up today on Uncommon Sense, join us as we interview Greg Pyne, a Chesterton Academy board member and a public school literature teacher. Stay tuned. Hello, and welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I am Grettelyn Darkey, your host, and I'm joined as always by my wonderful co-host, Joe Grabowski. How are you today, Joe?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. And we are so happy to be joined by a longtime Chestertonian friend, Greg Pyne. How are you today, Greg?
I'm doing well, Grettelyn. Good to talk to you guys today.
Wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Just for our listeners' sake, and because you try to tease it at the beginning there, tell us a little more about yourself, what you do, right. Your Chesterton connection, all that good stuff.
Oh, well, so my field is education. I guess you could say that broadly. And as you were saying, I do teach at a public school. We'll go into that, what that's like. But I teach AP literature at a rather large high school here in Winter Garden, Florida. I'm also on the board for Chesterton Academy Orlando with my good friend Brandon Vaught. And I also teach for homeschool connections as well. I have a course upcoming at the beginning of September and on Lord of the Rings. Yeah, so it's a big one. I'm looking forward to diving into that text. Previous to that, I had done C.S. Lewis, a couple C.S. Lewis books, Screwtape Letters and The Great Divorce, and Chesterton's Ballad of the White Horse.
Wonderful.
Well. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, just a little more about how you first encountered Chesterton, how you got into him, and how he's kind of influencing you even today.
Okay, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
It has a little bit of a longer kind of answer as well. I'm a convert to the Catholic Church. I entered the church in 2017, but if I'm honest, my journey to it began kind of circa 2006. And my education in literature, when I was getting my degree in literature, I was highly focused on the modernists. All right. This would be like Virginia Woolf and Ezra Pound. I was also reading like more the contemporary modernist and postmodernist writers like David Foster Wallace and all that. But ultimately, if you could put that in a character, it was very bleak literature. Let's just put it that way. Very, very, very bleak. I had no faith. I had been raised Christian, but I had no kind of firm faith at that point whatsoever. And I think just the malaise of all that kind of got to me. And while I was in my studies of literature, I came across C.S. Lewis. I came across Tolkien, and it was kind of reading them that led me to Chesterton. And that was pretty much it. It was a kind of a whirlwind affair of realizing that there was more to literature than absolute nihilism, which was really happy. That was a happy thing to realize. And I was actually thinking today about what would be this kind of, if there was a quote from Chesterton for me, what would it be that kind of sets the whole ball rolling? And it was actually just in the conference that we just recently had that it was alluded to again, where Chesterton says, and I don't have to read the whole thing, you guys know it, right? We are to regard existence as a raid or a great adventure. Okay. And what follows that is this idea of purpose, and this idea that life is a thing that's like worth living. It's an adventure to be had. And if you shrink from it, you're a traitor to the great scheme. And experience of being, right? And so that kind of struck me because the literature I had been reading at the point wasn't like that at all. And I actually thought in my naivete, that was that kind of be all end all of literature, of my studies. All right. This is where we had all kind of been brought up to, right? Going from the beginnings of Beowulf and all the way to Virginia Woolf. That's where it all ended. Thankfully, not the case, right? And so I start my journey from there. And the other kind of part of that, which I still find highly amusing to this day, is I was in that. I guess you could say, like, I wasn't an atheist. Nor could I even be said to be agnostic. I just didn't care. It just wasn't even on the radar. Okay. So here I am going through the cable channels, and the channel 73 down here in Florida was Comedy Central. All right. And that's where I was enjoying South Park and all sorts of stuff. Channel 72 was EWTN. Okay. And there was this annoying guy in an armchair periodically as I was flipping through the channels. A very smug person. Seemed to think he knew what he was talking about. He called himself Dale. And he was keep talking about this guy named Chesterton. And it was in this kind of tenuousness of like kind of realizing of, and starting to, like, I would argue with the TV. I would say, you're wrong. This is just hitting. And I go back to watching something else, and then I would turn the channel back. And so, believe it or not, like the Apostle of Common Sense, on EWTN was actually kind of part and parcel of this as well. And I really think just God was taking out the big guns in some way and just saying, here, and just drawing me in or hunting me down as the hound of heaven often does. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of us
Long
need a little
answer, I know, but
no, it's okay. Some of us need a tap on the shoulder, and some of us need a 2x4 to the face, and
yes.
That's okay.
I'm the latter. I'll admit that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Having watched The Apostle of Common Sense, do you remember kind of where your reading journey with, as a literature guy, like where that began with Chesterton? Because I know I kind of came at it opposite, where Chesterton sort of led me to a love of English literature and situating him in there. But I find that Chesterton is really fun to look at in his contemporary milieu. And just the contrast there is quite striking. But yeah, how about your kind of literary journey with GK?
Yeah, so it's often for former Protestants, the catalyst is often C.S. Lewis. It really, really is. Lewis mentions Chesterton in Surprised by Joy. He talks about the influence of the everlasting man. And just through that and through Apostle of Common Sense, probably the first thing that I picked up was orthodoxy. All right. Orthodoxy kind of began. It was more the essays than anything else, rather than, let's say, Father Brown, Ballad of the White Horse, or any of his poetry, or Napoleon of Notting Hill. All of these became like big favorites of mine as I was going forward. But kind of reading, literary arguments, I guess you can say, right, of what literature should be, what it is, what it aims for, etc. Kind of Chesterton got into that mix, and his diction and syntax, the way that he dances, I'll say that it's a dance with Chesterton. It's an acrobatic tumble that you're taking with this guy every time you read him, right? And although the modernist authors that I was reading, Virginia Woolf was actually a particular favorite of mine. She wrote beautifully. She did, right? You can't say that's not the case, but there was this kind of vibrancy with Chesterton that immediately attracted me, and the fact that he was so counter to, right? What the arguments initially were that were kind of out there, right? Even if stated indirectly through literature, right? So you can read, for example, a book like Jacob's Room by Virginia Woolf, a very bleak kind of retelling of a soldier's experience in World War I, completely valid as well, and a beautiful work of literature. But the end of it is just like it's almost like an abysmal sigh, of just like, But with Chesterton, there's something a little bit more bracing about him, and I just enjoyed it. I loved how he just bounced around, and he was just having a fine time writing. All right. And when you have an author that does that, Charles Dickens is another one that comes to mind, that he's just having a grand time doing what he's doing. You want to know what's behind that as well. That was a big thing with me. I'm like, okay, what is making him be the way he is, right? And of course, Chesterton doesn't hold himself back, right? I think Dale at some point says that Chesterton, in most of the characters that Chesterton comes up with, are thinly veiled representations of himself, right? So if you think Innocent Smith and Man Alive, right? So it's going to be right there for you what he is proposing, and it's beguiling. It's attractive. It's attractive, and was such a change from what I was reading. And it was like, okay, so where is this going? That's another thing too. It's like, well, if literature isn't just kind of devolving into the David Markson, I guess you can say, type novels or something like that. It's like, where is this leading to, right? And of course, it all leads to Christ. It all leads to his truth. And Chesterton rightly saying that Christ's truth is a living truth. There's again that vibrancy that's there. Our Father is younger than we, as Chesterton has said as well. The mirth of God, and I think Chesterton taps into that, and it's so attractive and it's so wonderful. And you just want to kind of follow him down the path as well of the rolling English road, where you don't know where you're going. He's going all over the place, but you're going to follow him. You're going to follow him, and you're going to get to good places.
I love that. And I do love the, I think Chesterton, there's nothing sort of smug or pretentious about him. Where like you were saying, Joe, with his contemporaries, like you do find that. I mean, you can't binge George Bernard Shaw because it's all the same after a while. And it's just kind of like all these characters are just so, into themselves, and it gets boring, quite frankly. But Chesterton, like Dickens, is not like that. And it is so sort of refreshing to find someone so humble. And yeah, it speaks to something that you start to want in your own life, and you start to look for it and figure out what it was. It's like a puzzle. And then once you get there, it's hard to go back.
Definitely. I'm really thankful as well, because, Chesterton has his equal contemporaries and brothers in arms as well. It's quite often through Chesterton that you're going to get introduced to Belloc as well, Hilaire Belloc. It's just kind of the way that it seems to go, and the way that I was kind of envisioning it today, because Belloc is such a different writer as well. But there's like this kind of militant march with Belloc, trundling like a Roman soldier, not around the trees but through the trees kind of thing with Belloc, and with Chesterton kind of bouncing along beside him. I don't know why that image comes to mind, but it does, and it just works wonderfully. All right, the Chester Belloc animal has an interesting gait, that's what I'll say, an interesting way of walking.
Yes.
Yeah. And just, it pulled me right in, pulled me right into the church as well. Right. That quote that I was mentioning earlier, the that life is a raid, it's a great assault. And what he says there is, there's a flag as well. There's a flag that's being flown, and which high town are you assaulting? Which flag are you flying? Right. And in our contemporary culture, and this was very much my case, I was flying my flag. That, what else were you going to do? There was nothing to anchor, right? Or it seems in contemporary society, there's nothing that you need to be anchored to, right? Except yourself, except your own concept of self, right? And you have to, and Chesterton kind of forces that question on you, right? Because I think the great thing about Chesterton and Lewis and Belloc, the saints of the church, etc., you notice that they never point to themselves. They always point to Christ. There's always that vision that I get over there, look over there. No, not me. Enjoy me. Okay, that's great. Okay, now look over there, because that's who I'm pointing to, right? And as you were saying, Grettelyn, earlier, most of the modernist authors, and I don't think they actually wanted to do this, but in some way, it was kind of forced. But it's like it's the inside, and that can be a very, very lonely place. And Chesterton says it's not like that. Right. There's a particular spot in Orthodoxy, if I'm not mistaken, where he's, the man who's convinced that he is God. And what a poor universe you occupy with only butterflies as angels.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of resonates as well. And again, just kind of points to the fullness of the church and the fullness of Christ as well. Yeah. One and the same, of course. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's I think the modernist trajectory in fiction in particular, poetry, I think, is up to something maybe a little different, or at least doing it in a certainly different way. But in fiction in the modern era, one understands the appeal in that it resonates with human experience. We all experience angst and sorrow and doubt and struggle in our lives, and the psychologically real novel takes that and puts it in a way outside of us so that we can analyze it and resonate with it. And at its best, it leads to a kind of catharsis. I'm thinking of people like Dostoevsky, for example. But
yeah,
while that's an appreciated service that it performs for us, because it is sort of, sometimes when you read the best of that kind of fiction, it's oh, this is saying what I felt, and that's great. But the same is true of joy, that when you have joy overflowing and exuberant joy and joy with no prior cause, consolation with no prior cause, right? That's in some ways even more daunting to put into expression and to find adequate expression for. And so I think it's all the more of a service when you have an author like Chesterton who can seem to capture that side of not just our spiritual, but just the human life of just his writing on the experience of nature, the experience of love, the experience of reading a good book. I think is just it's great consolation for those of us who maybe want to spend a little more time thinking about the good parts of life instead of the gloomy.
Yeah, there is a balance there, and I was thinking of Dostoevsky as well. The Notes from the Underground. Not the most, that's not the most cheerful book in the world. All right, let's just put it that way. But yeah, it does express, so I don't want to seem like I'm like denigrating the modernist authors, in that respect. But yeah, balance, balance is key. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was talking to my students about this, and this was years and years ago. I've been on the education thing for almost 20 years now, and I was noticing I was reflecting with this on my students at the beginning. The most of the works that I was assigning my students were, the Shakespearean tragedies, Antigone, that kind of stuff. Yeah, but it was all tragedy. I can remember my students asking me, this was years ago, saying, "Hey, Ms. Pyne, are we going to read something where someone doesn't die?" I was like, you know what? That's a good point. That's a really, really, really good point. And I had to look at my syllabus and say no that year. I'm like, no, they're all going to die. All right. That's all there is to it. Right. But over the years, kind of bringing that balance into the text as well. It's interesting with the curriculum that we have in the public school system. Shakespeare is still present. He hasn't disappeared entirely, but it's going to be basically Romeo and Juliet in their freshman year. And it goes to sometimes Julius Caesar in the sophomore year, Macbeth in the junior year, and my particular plays that I like to teach are King Lear, Hamlet, and Othello. Well, if you notice in that list, all right, it starts off good. Starts off with a marriage, but they all end with everybody dying, right? So I'm actually bringing in a balance this year where I do Othello and Much Ado About Nothing. I'm doing a more contemporary novel later on this year called A Thousand Splendid Suns by Carlo Rossini, just a real kind of tearjerker of a novel. Very well written, though, very well written. But then after that, Pride and Prejudice with Jane Austen, because if we keep on feeding the students, well, here's literature, and it's this like really, really, really bleak stuff. No wonder they're like, you know what? I never want to read again. That's like, forget about it, And I actually have snuck Chesterton in to the public school. Joe, Greta and I were talking about this a little earlier before you came on. It's possible. It is absolutely possible. All right?
Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Okay, we're gonna thank the bureaucratic oversight of the educational system. All right, where everything is just so bogged down in the regulations, and it's just the classroom teacher kind of gets lost. Classroom teacher kind of gets lost. And the niche that I have kind of put myself into of being the only AP literature teacher at my school is that I can kind of choose what books I want to do, right? Whatever books are going to attend to the skills that they're saying that the students need to learn, right? That's a wide open category, isn't it? Right there. It's like, okay, can you please teach a text that's going to teach tone? Okay. That's all of them. So just as I'll say, unfortunately, we do have some educators that are kind of bringing in maybe material not quite so suitable in the classroom. I've brought in Napoleon of Notting Hill. I've brought in Ballad of the White Horse. I've brought in some of the Father Brown stuff as well, because it attends to either the theme that we're talking about, or it's just going to fit. It's just going to fit. And the students eat it up. They really like them. They they don't understand them. All right. They'll be the first ones to say that we don't get it. All right. But, for those of us that are teachers, when we hear we don't get it, that's our cue to talk for 3 hours. So and we'll just jump in and do that. And it's been really fun kind of seeing the students' reactions. I would say especially to the Napoleon of Notting Hill, which is such a wonderful satire.
Yes. And
the students get the edge that Chesterton's kind of bringing into that. And they're amazed that, one of my students said, there's another 1984, right? Because he sets it in 1984. I'm like, actually, yeah, you're right.
That is true. So yeah, the king figure is one of my favorites in that book. He's so ridiculous. I can't think of his name right now, but he's just. I love how he goes out to have a joke, and then it ends up being like the reality of his whole world.
The joke becomes the government.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
There's some commentary there. I guess if you want to talk about that. So.
No, but it's wonderful that you're bringing this to young minds that probably would never find it otherwise. And it is good to have that balance. And I think part of what brings such joy to Chesterton is that there's sort of like there's that spirit of adventure, but there's all these like Chesterton's all about conversions, right? So there's all these little like micro conversion moments, and I don't necessarily mean big C conversion like to Christianity, but conversion to life, conversion to adventure, conversion to home defense in the case of Napoleon of Notting Hill. And that's something that you can find in really the best of Catholic literature. I'm thinking like even as bleak as Flannery O'Connor, and yet in the midst of death, she has that moment where there's a conversion happens or something happens and there's a spark and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so bleak, but that was so bright. And how did she do that? And it's so much harder, I think, to write that than to write just a straight bleak novel. You know,
that is true. And I'll admit that Flannery O'Connor is still someone that I'm struggling with in the classroom. I tell my students, here's a woman that's probably only 4 feet tall and she scares the hell out of me. You know, that's what I say about Flannery O'Connor. And of course, the quintessential short story that she has a good man is hard to find.
Yeah.
That just wrecks my students. Are like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Right. And then I explain it's kind of almost like a happy ending too. And they're like, no, Mr. Pyne. I go, no, it's the realization of, okay. Yeah, it didn't work. But
it's a hard one. It's hard to teach, but Chesterton can be hard to teach too, because it's a similar, even though his stories aren't bleak, I think it's a similar kind of thing that you're trying to get across. You know, you feel it, but it's hard to explain it.
Yeah, and you know what? I was talking to my students about this today. We just started Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I was telling them, look, this is going to be the diction and syntax of romantic Gothic literature. All right. She's not going to just say it's sunny outside, right? She's going to say, oh, I looked upon the sky and thought of my childhood yet past, in which I enjoyed these days of reverie. And yes, indeed, the warm sun shining down. That's what she's going to say, right? So my students are I'm not going to say just my students. I think just students in general. I think society in general is we just kind of want to get to the point too fast, and we want them to be entertained very quickly, right? And the thing with Chesterton is that he's going to lead you down that maze a little bit, right? It's going to get to a point, and when it gets to a point, it's going to hit really, really hard, right? But he's going to have fun, dancing around the landscape. Before he gets to it, and it's kind of a marvelous thing of what I'm constantly telling my students is you got to take your time, slow down, you're fine, all right. There's no rush to get the right answer here. There's no right answer here, all right. There's this road that we're on, and let's talk about each step along the way, right? That's what we're doing, and Chesterton kind of forces that as well. I think so, yeah. In the best way possible.
Yeah, I love that. I used to have a rule for myself, and this is what got me through my first Chesterton book, that older authors, I would always give them at least one chapter. And of course, at the end of the chapter is always when Chesterton does that thing where it's like, and then the whole world turns upside down. So yeah, but if I hadn't had that rule, I probably would have just closed the book after the first page, so yeah, it's very true. You got to slow down.
Indeed.
Well, we are getting towards time. This was very, very fun and interesting. Do you have any final thoughts, Greg, before we sign off here?
Oh, man. I will say, just from my own personal experience, that Chesterton has not just been like an entertaining author. To me, he's been a really strong guide. And I can say as well that stumbling across you guys, right, in the Society of G.K. Chesterton, formerly the American Chesterton Society, right? And I think my first conference was in 2013. The physical manifestation of Chesterton's writings was immediate, right? So that almost dancing around, and that joy. There you go. There it is. That joy that was there. I consider myself highly blessed when it comes to that. And because Chesterton doesn't just lead you to himself, he leads you to Christ, and he leads you to community as well. And I'm just really thankful for the just wonderful people that I've been able to kind of meet along the way, just through reading him.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I hope that was a good endorsement for everybody listening, that you can have a local society, you can read Chesterton, you can read him with friends. Just, go to chesterton.org if you want to learn how to do that. We have lots of resources for you. But don't be afraid, and know that your life actually will be better with Chesterton and with other Chestertonians. Anyway, thank you so much, Greg. This has been really great.
Awesome, guys. You guys have a fantastic day. All right.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Joe.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank all of you for listening, for tuning in, for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, teach that algorithm that we need to get these videos in front of more people, because as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Thank you, and God bless.